Before we start, viewers are strongly warned to exercise caution. The following is solely for educational and amusement purposes and includes the exact words of Sean Diddy's federal courtroom testimony. The courtroom wasn't prepared for what came next during Combs' trial. According to Inner City Press, when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, global legend, former wrestling champion, blockbuster sensation, entered the not to sell a film, but to confess, he appeared in court with a face few had ever seen, broken, vulnerable, and terrified. As he took the stand, he detailed a horrific sequence of, according to reports, initiations occurred behind the scenes of his ascent to prominence. What stunned everyone was not only what he went through, but also who planned it. Sean Diddy Combs, The Rock, in tears as he disclosed Diddy's strange manipulation of early Hollywood contacts, including a perverse custom involving the consumption of raw monkey brains while being imprisoned in a basement and required to demonstrate allegiance. Via humiliation, Dwayne's oath-taking remarks left the courtroom stunned. None had anticipated it. There was no press notice, no notification, and no rumors in the corridor. The testimony of celebrities like Monique, Denzel Washington, and Jamie Foxx had already rocked the courtroom. But when the side door opened and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson entered, the room wasn't simply freeze, it broke. The man who clapped back on red carpets and energized crowds in wrestling stadiums was no longer the cheerful, self-assured, motivating figure that millions knew. The man strolling, he carried no documents or notes, only the weight of something he had never said out loud, and his signature brow was wrinkled in emotional agony rather than arrogance. He suddenly appeared haunted and exhausted. Seated next to his defense team, Diddy turned and appeared to stiffen. His attorneys whispered in quick succession, clearly caught off guard. Prosecutors, meantime, looked at each other. They had kept this name silent for a purpose, as this moment would alter everything. Dwayne hesitated to sit down as he took the stand, resting both hands on the railing and glancing at the. Before we start, the judge nodded and turned to face the gallery, then the jury, and then Diddy. I don't want to be here, but I have to be because I've lived with something that's consumed me for nearly 2 decades. And the truth is that I'm still afraid. But I'm more afraid of what will happen if I say nothing. The court remained motionless. Dwayne was sworn in, and when he finally sat, his voice was, "You all know me as The Rock, the person who never breaks. But I'm about to break, and I need everyone in this. Low and gritty, not from theatrics, but barely repressed emotion." His lips trembled as he spoke. And I was one of them. What I'm about to tell isn't just about Combs. It's about how he got away with it for so long. I was among those who believed that complying meant surviving. Therefore, I did so at a cost no one ever noticed. And as a result, the trial room and the cultural discourse as a whole changed because the court leaned in as Dwayne Johnson started to recount a Hollywood initiation that was so strange and degrading that it would make headlines for years to come. Recounting his initial interactions with Diddy in 2001, when I was switching from professional wrestling to cinema, Scorpion King had just released, and Diddy seemed like a guardian angel, a connector, someone who had the capacity to open every door in Hollywood, he remarked, sounding eager, ambitious, yet naive. I didn't question it when let's talk off the record, he said. Dwayne described how Diddy asked him to industry night's special VIP events, which I assumed were purely business-related, events held at his homes in Miami and Los Angeles. At first, they weren't crazy parties. Instead, they were relaxed champagne handshakes with casting directors, producers, and studio personnel. Dwayne claimed that as time went on, the atmosphere shifted, and it began to feel more like a test than a networking opportunity. He would ask, "Are you up for greatness? Would you bleed for it?" I dismissed it, but his expression remained fixed. Next came the favors. Diddy would ask Dwayne to attend parties at strange hours after instructing him to show up at he claimed that at 2:13 a.m., when actual judgments are made, Johnson arrived at the Bear residence and remained there alone for more than an hour until a group of it was like a cult, waiting for its leader when Diddy came, supposedly turning down the lights and playing music. Silent visitors arrived in black suits and no talk was permitted. "Are you worthy? Are you ready? Will you eat what I feed you?" Diddy's voice could be heard repeatedly via hidden speakers. "I believed it to be art," Dwayne said. Court. Some perverted, creative, motivational thing I kept telling myself, it's just showbiz, but I had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the first I intended to decline Diddy's invitation to meet him alone at a hidden spot outside of Los Angeles. But my publicist persuaded me that it might be the encounter that transforms your life. When Dwayne Johnson said, "monkey brains," it changed everything, but not in the way I had anticipated. He stared directly at the jurors. The atmosphere in the courtroom changed from one of shock to one of horror. He paused for a long time before continuing, saying, "This is the part I've never stated out loud. Not to my wife, not to my friends, not even to my..." He told me how he was blindfolded and transported to a private home outside of Los Angeles. I asked the driver where we were, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned up the music. When he arrived, he was led by two guys into a dimly lit room with black cloth-covered walls and crimson lanterns on the floor. He was seated around a low table. At the head of the table, Diddy was laughing calmly, while holding a crystal glass filled with what Dwayne said appeared to be oil. 5 men in suits were all silent. The tray was then brought out by a man wearing a white robe. They didn't say anything about it. They just put it in front of me and opened it. It was a steel plate with raw monkey brain chunks on it that were still boiling. There was no seasoning, just tissue. Dwayne stared down, shivering wetly, and Diddy's voice broke as he added, "Everyone who made it ate, everyone who didn't disappeared." "Let him feel the pressure," he said, instructing the guys to turn to face me. He claimed that when he attempted to leave, the Hollywood is not about skill, Diddy remarked, leaning in close as he offered him a spoon. The door was shut. I questioned if this was a prank or a ritual. I even tried laughing, but no one laughed with me, about compliance. Dwayne started crying on the stand at this point, and I was afraid that I was being humiliated. I only recall the sound of the room laughing as he chewed the spoon by himself with trembling hands, and I don't remember the taste. For half an hour, he sat at the table while they observed him do the process. When it was finished, Diddy reportedly got up and clapped, saying, "Welcome to level 2, and Dwayne glanced at him. The courtroom was silent as I left the jury room, feeling as though a piece of me had died, not because of what I had eaten, but rather because of what I had sacrificed to eat it. Wasn't simply a tale of abuse. It was a man's account of the lengths individuals would go to in order to achieve success." Dwayne Johnson's voice steadied as he described what happened next. The unsettling practice, he explained, which he now understood to be psychological conditioning, was intended to deprive him of his independence and turn him into a dependent. With the consent of those in authority, they began to treat me differently, not better, as though I were now one of them. However, they also needed to make sure I would keep silent. He remembered being invited to what he believed to be a business retreat at a remote desert house. But upon arriving, he saw no agents and no studio. He said that I would obey. Dwayne claimed that CEOs and a small group of other performers, some of whom were just starting out in their careers, and others who were already well known, were put in separate. There were windowless rooms, phones were confiscated, music played non-stop. For hours, food was delivered sporadically, and they were instructed to learn odd scripts. Assumed it was performance training or some strange workshop, until I heard the chanting of affirmations about giving up control to the higher power of success, and spoke only when directed. He paused, and I didn't say anything because I felt maybe I was insane that if I told someone, they'd claim that it was about submission. They wanted us to confuse pain with growth and fear with loyalty. I was overanalyzing it, but it wasn't just me. We would cross paths in the hallway and exchange glances as if we were both stuck in the same unsaid nightmare. Dwayne clarified that, after it wasn't just about acting anymore, he felt like he was being conditioned and used as a product. He also realized that he was having trouble sleeping and doubting who he was. Dwayne Johnson went on to explain what he called the machine, saying that it was shaped by silent hands behind the curtain and that they didn't require chains, just silence, bewilderment, and control. Behind the scenes, he testified that after taking part in what he called the obedience trials, he was immediately inundated with chances, but all came with conditions. So I began to offers for unexpected films that I wasn't even meant to be considered, for people informed me that Diddy had endorsed you, and I was really appreciative. He recounted a meeting with the head of a large studio remarked, "We hear you're someone who plays the game." And that was all that mattered, without discussing my talent. When Dwayne inquired, Dwayne inquired. He was frequently told that his alternatives would go if he didn't maintain excellent relations with specific individuals on specific contract terms or desired adjustments. I understood that these weren't offers, but rather duties. He claimed that Diddy's influence extended well beyond music. He was more than just a producer. He had connections, holdings in businesses, favors owing, and an unwritten rule that if he wanted, you blacklisted. Dwayne claimed that after turning down an invitation to an after-hours event, his agent contacted the next week to inform him that a big studio had removed his name off a project at the last minute. And I realized that silence wasn't only expected, but required. Even those in his immediate vicinity were wary. He started to feel like a puppet whose strings were tugged, and my managers, lawyers, and everyone else understood where the lines were. No one wanted to mention him unless it was in a positive light. You rapidly discover that the people in Hollywood who control access don't do it openly. Rather, they do it through covert connections kept together by secrets, terror, and favors. Whispering debts and favors. Dwayne Johnson spoke with a noticeable sadness in his voice as he explained how he witnessed too much and realized he could no longer be a part of. He recounted a private function at a posh mansion in the Hollywood Hills, to which he had been invited under the guise of a private screening and was grudgingly taken into the Circle, industry networking event. But as soon as I arrived, I realized it wasn't that. The home was dark, with security guards at each door, and phones were confiscated at the entrance. Masks were given to guests. It felt less like a party and more like someone else's initiation, not mine, but theirs. And he wandered the event's periphery uneasily, unsettled by what he observed. Not for the show, but for anonymity, observed people I liked, including actors, musicians, and filmmakers, acting in ways that didn't seem celebratory. They appeared confused, as if they were attempting to conceal or prove something. Dwayne claimed to have seen a well-known younger actor sobbing in a corridor while holding a shaky drink. When I inquired about his well-being, he replied, "They told me this is what it takes." Dwayne left early that night, saying, "I saw the machinery underneath and the glamour cracked." He walked home without sleeping, not only because of what he witnessed, but also because he realized that he had paid a price for protection. "I was invited because I was helpful, not because they loved me, because I had demonstrated my ability to remain silent," he said, sobbing. But seeing that young man reminded me of who I was before all of this, before the dread, before that was the night I decided I wouldn't lie if anyone ever asked me what I saw, he added, looking at the judge with embarrassment. On the witness stand today, he maintained that pledge. The courtroom was painfully still as Dwayne Johnson entered the stand, and everyone's attention was focused on him, not because of his notoriety, but because of his honesty. He took a deep breath and gazed. He replied, "Why do actors, musicians, athletes, and people with platforms not speak up when we see things that aren't right?" When people asked him why he remained silent, he glanced down and moaned. He added that for a large portion of his early Hollywood career, he thought the only way to survive was to keep moving, smile, and perform, and to avoid asking questions of others in. He claimed that his quiet was motivated by fear of reprisals rather than guilt, and that you're trained not to upset people or call names because you believe that if I speak, I would lose everything I've worked so hard to achieve. Threats aren't always there when someone is blacklisted as difficult or untrustworthy. Sometimes it's just seeing them go. Roles drying up, calls stopping, contracts vanish. He made reference to other actors who left the limelight after leaving the inner circle, claiming that they weren't unstable or insane, but rather that they were worn out from acting. The psychological cost of keeping secrets, according to Dwayne, is that it makes you feel like you're a part of something, which makes you anxious and unsure of whom to trust. He paused again, his voice shaking slightly. And worst of all, you began to wonder if you were really signing up for this. But leaving means burning bridges no one else will ever rebuild for you. Complicit simply by living. He gestured to Cassie Ventura's legal team and continued. Everything changed when she came forward. Silence protects the wrong people, it reminded me. As the courtroom watched Dwayne Johnson sit taller and more assured than before, he spoke as a guy who had been transformed by his experiences rather than as The Rock. There's a belief that if you succeed, you're untouchable. He claimed to have established a reputation on strength, resilience, and positivity. But in reality, he frequently felt helpless behind the scenes. Vulnerable, but the truth is that the higher you go, the harder it is to speak. Couldn't discuss what I saw and experienced since it didn't match the picture. He acknowledged that he kept quiet for years because speaking seemed to come at too high a cost. But in recent years, particularly when more survivors came forward in the field, he started to view his quiet in a different light. He claimed that it ceased being self-preservation and instead began to feel like. He recalled being told by a teenage fan, "You're the guy who never quits." That comment remained with him because, in a sense, he had given up on his ideals. His younger self and those still bound by power structures didn't select Dwayne, and he brushed away a tear. "I'm not testifying to discredit anyone. I'm here because I've been silent long enough, and I don't want anyone who admires me to believe that silence equals strength." He stated that this wasn't about assigning blame, but rather about taking responsibility, and I want those in positions of authority to understand that we as Dwayne Johnson turned to confront Sean Diddy Combs directly. The courtroom became heated. "See you now, you're not invisible anymore. I want to say this to you, Manto." He started by saying, "I've carried it for too long," without raising his voice or making any dramatic gestures, but his words had a deeper impact because of their quiet conviction, which led me to believe that I had to make a sacrifice. I believed that in order to succeed, I had to compromise my morals in order to enter the room. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on Diddy, but it wasn't strength, it was fear. Under the cover of influence, he talked about the other people who had met Diddy, the ones who lacked the courage to speak, and the ones who were still going through. He paused. "You don't get to define my silence. I'm speaking for them now. For the people who were told they had no choice, that dignity and dreams couldn't coexist." The truth is that Dwayne left the courtroom not as a legacy anymore, as his last remarks reverberated in the quiet courtroom as he walked down from the stand. Victim. Not as a headline, but as someone who had taken back his narrative, no longer silent or afraid, and the world was aware that something had just happened in Hollywood. A quiet rumble went through the gallery as the bailiff led Dwayne Johnson away from the witness stand. But Dwayne stopped before he crossed the swinging courtroom doors. "I want to leave one more thing on record," he stated in a determined voice, not to look at Diddy or address the media, but to face the room one last time. "This tale, my story, isn't just about me. It's about the people who never get to sit in this chair, the ones who didn't live long enough to speak, and the ones who are still hidden behind the curtain. It's not about fame, controversies, or news headlines." Fearing they would not be believed, he turned slightly and spoke to the judge, jury, and the entire culture that allowed the quiet to persist for so long. For decades, Hollywood has been constructed on a falsehood, the idea that abuse of power is justified, and that success has a cost we cannot question. But that idea is now dispelling. Not out of anger, not with retaliation, but with honesty. He inhaled. "And I said nothing because I feared losing everything. But they never had anything. In actuality, if I lacked myself, a little voice of encouragement sounded." Out of the courtroom's corner, attorneys looked about, uncertain about whether to intercede. He was not stopped by the judge. Dwayne gave another nod to anyone there. Viewing this and still pondering whether speaking up is safe, "Therefore, let's take this opportunity. Your signal has ended the quiet. We're not scared no more." After saying that, he left. The no cameras were used in the courtroom. Handlers hurried to fabricate a story. Just a man who at last made the decision to talk, and that, for the first time in a long time, time didn't know how to be quiet.